You ever notice how sound works? How it never truly disappears? Even when a noise stops, something lingers, an echo, a vibration, a feeling in the air. That's what I tell myself, anyway. That the things I hear now are just leftovers, something explainable, something science can put a name to. But I know better. I think you do too. There's a point where sound shouldn't be there. A speaker, dead and disconnected, shouldn't hum. A TV, powered off, shouldn't flicker with something just beneath the glass. The radio dial, turned to static, shouldn't carry a voice so clear you almost answer back. At first, I thought it was me. Lack of sleep, paranoia, my brain filling in gaps. But it's not just me. You'll notice it too, if you really start listening. Because it's not coming from inside your head. It's already here. I stopped looking at the statue, but it never really left me. Even after it disappeared, even after I told myself it was over, I could still feel it. A weight in the air, pressing down, stretching thin, something unfinished. Then the voices started. Not in my head, not hallucinations, real sound, real words, coming from places they had no business being. It started with the radio. I was in a taxi, the driver barely speaking. The road ahead stretched too far. The soft crackle of an AM station played under the hum of the engine, distant, barely a murmur beneath the static. Then, mid-song, the music cut out. Silence. Then a voice. His voice. Not an announcement, not a press conference. Just talking, low and steady, the same tone I had heard 1,000 times. I didn't recognize the words at first. They didn't sound like any speech I remembered. Just fragments, broken phrases without context. A list of things that never happened. The greatest economy in history. Your children will remember what we've built. We have always led, we have always won. It wasn't an interview. It wasn't a recording. It felt different. I checked the station. The screen showed no broadcast details. Just a string of numbers that didn't match any frequency I had ever seen. The driver didn't react, didn't turn it off, didn't adjust the dial. Just kept driving, hands firm on the wheel, as if he wasn't hearing it at all. I asked him if the station was broken. He didn't answer, didn't blink, didn't move. I watched his lips. They were moving in sync with the broadcast, whispering the words before they were spoken. I got out at the next light. I tried to ignore it. I tried to believe it was just an isolated thing, some rogue signal bleeding through old airwaves. But it didn't stop. The next time, it was in my apartment. The TV was off, the screen dark, the remote untouched. But as I walked past, the air buzzed just slightly, like the static charge of an old tube screen warming up. Then the words came, not through the speakers, through the glass itself. Soft just beneath the surface, as if the pixels were trying to pull the image through from somewhere else. I watched, heart pounding, as the shapes shifted, not fully, not clearly, just enough to make me doubt my own eyes. But I could hear him. There is no past, only progress. You will understand soon. Together, we will become something more. I pressed my hand against the screen. The vibration ran through my palm. A heartbeat, a pulse. The screen was alive. I unplugged it. The voice kept going. It spread after that. Radios, street speakers, old intercoms in empty buildings, the buzz of a dead phone line. I was in a grocery store, waiting in line, when the self-checkout kiosk stuttered mid-sentence. The robotic voice glitched, twisting over itself, before his voice slid into place. The cashier didn't notice. The customers didn't react. They just stood there, faces blank, hands still scanning items like nothing had changed. I looked at the man behind me. His lips were moving, quietly, softly, repeating the words as they were spoken. I stepped back. He turned to look at me. And for just a moment, I swore his eyes were glass. I stopped sleeping. I stopped going outside. It didn't matter, because the voice found its way in anyway. The baby monitor in the apartment next door, static at first, then words forming inside the hiss. The electric hum of my refrigerator whispering between cycles. The flicker of streetlights in the distance pulsing in rhythm to something unsaid. It was everywhere now. And it wasn't just sound. It was in the silence too, waiting. Then the phone rang. A number I didn't recognize. No caller ID. I let it ring, let it ring, let it ring. Then it stopped, and I heard the voice behind me. Not through a speaker, not from a screen. Right behind me. I turned. No one was there. But the sound remained. A low murmur, shifting just beneath the floorboards, threading through the air like it had always been there. I covered my ears. It didn't stop. I screamed. It didn't stop. I ran the sink, flushed the toilet, turned on every faucet, every fan, anything to drown it out. It didn't stop, because the voice wasn't something playing, it was something growing. That night, I left my apartment. I walked the streets, no destination, no direction, just moving to move. The city felt emptier, but I knew it wasn't. The people were still there. They were just listening now. Mouths slightly open, hands at their sides, some barely moving as they walked, some standing perfectly still. Their eyes flicked to me as I passed. And in that moment, I knew they heard it too. They weren't ignoring it. They had simply stopped resisting. I reached the end of my street and froze. There, in the middle of the intersection, a television sat alone on the pavement, wires snaking across the ground like veins. The screen flickered. Not static, not a broadcast, a live feed of me, standing exactly where I was, staring into the glass, watching myself in real time. But there was a delay, a fraction of a second, and I watched myself blink before I actually did. I turned and ran, didn't stop, didn't look back. My breath hitched, my vision swam, my ears rang with something I couldn't shake. I stumbled into an alley, pressed myself against the brick, tried to block it all out. Then the streetlights hummed, and the whispers came from inside the walls. "You are ready now. Join us. Listen." I squeezed my eyes shut, and then the lights cut out. I don't know when I woke up. The sky outside looked the same as it always did. Dim, colorless, frozen somewhere between dawn and dusk. The kind of light that made it impossible to tell if the day was beginning or ending. I reached for my phone. The screen blinked awake, dull blue light searing my eyes. February 9th, that wasn't right. I checked the time, 3:47 a.m. I set the phone down, rubbed my eyes, tried to shake off the grogginess. The room felt heavy, the air too still. I picked up the phone again. February 9th, 3:47 a.m. The numbers hadn't changed. I sat up, heart pounding, opened my laptop. The lock screen glowed in the dark, clock sitting in the corner. 3:47 a.m. Refreshed the page. The numbers didn't move. The second hand on my watch stood perfectly still. I held my breath, listening for the tick, for the small mechanical click that had always been there. Nothing. Like time had simply stepped away. I tried the television next. The screen buzzed to life, bright and empty, before a broadcast flickered into place. I knew what it was before I even saw it. A podium, a familiar face, the endless speech playing as if nothing had changed. Except I knew now. I knew that it wasn't playing at all. It had never stopped. The words came slow, deliberate, rhythmic, in a way that felt too practiced, too refined. Same cadence I had heard 1,000 times before. "We have built something great. We will carry this nation forward. History is being made." I switched the channel. Another podium, another shot of him speaking. The same words, every channel, every broadcast, no reporters, no breaking news, no interruptions, just the loop. I checked my messages. The last texts from friends were from yesterday. No new notifications, no emails, no timestamps that made sense. It was like everyone had stopped talking at the exact same moment. I sent a message. "Are you seeing this?" The screen loaded. No delivery checkmark. I sent another. "Hello?" Nothing. Then the phone buzzed. A new message appeared. "Yes." No name, no number, just an answer with no sender. I dropped the phone. The world outside looked normal. People walked the streets, cars moved, storefronts were open. The illusion of routine played out in perfect mechanical harmony. But no one was checking their watches. No one was glancing at their phones. No one seemed to notice that nothing was moving forward. I passed a cafe. A man inside stirred his coffee, eyes blank, the spoon circling the same pattern in the cup over and over again. A woman at the counter flipped through a newspaper, the same page. A boy kicked a soccer ball, but it never left his foot, just rolled back and forth like an unfinished thought. They weren't frozen, not completely, but they weren't progressing either, like a clock missing a minute hand, like a record skipping, but never stopping. At the train station, the schedule screen flickered, repeating the same departure times. No arrivals, no delays, no future. The announcer's voice crackled overhead, reading a list of train times that had already passed. Except they hadn't. They never would. The trains never arrived. The passengers stood waiting, blank expressions, no urgency in their posture. Just standing, forever expecting something that would never come. I watched a man check his watch. February 9th, 3:47 a.m. He nodded, satisfied, and put his wrist down. I turned to leave, and a screen by the exit blinked to life. A live feed of me standing there, watching the others. I backed away. The screen followed. The moment my foot stepped outside the station, the camera cut to black. I ran. Down streets that didn't feel like streets anymore. Past people who weren't really there. Through a city that had turned into a loop of itself. A copy of a copy with no original left to reference. I ran because I didn't know what else to do. And then I saw the TV. A giant screen mounted on the side of a building flickering in the early morning light. The speech was playing. His face, his words, the same cadence, the same tone. But then the picture glitched. For a fraction of a second, his face shifted. Not distorted, not static, something underneath. Something watching me through the screen. The voice didn't stop. We have always been here. We have always led. We will guide you forward. My knees locked, my stomach turned. I felt something behind me. I turned, and there, at the far end of the street, the statue was back. Closer, its head tilted slightly lower, as if it was looking directly at me. I ran again, past people who no longer noticed me, past buildings that felt more like backdrops than places, past memories that had been rewritten without me knowing. I ran until I reached my apartment, slammed the door shut, bolted every lock, and pulled the blinds. But when I turned around, my TV was already on. The speech was still playing. But this time, his lips weren't moving at all. I didn't sleep. I didn't move. I sat in front of the screen, watching, waiting, heart pounding, pulse too loud. Then, as if on cue, the broadcast cut out. Black screen. Silence. Then, one word. Typed across the television, letter by letter, as if someone was writing it in real time. Listen. I don't remember deciding to leave. Maybe it wasn't a choice. Maybe it was instinct, some final desperate part of me clawing for something real, something outside of this. Whatever it was, by the time I registered what I was doing, I was already on the road, driving. The city stretched behind me in the mirror, fading into the horizon. It looked normal, at least from a distance. But I knew better now. I had seen the cracks, the missing pieces, the gaps in reality where something had been rewritten. This wasn't a city anymore. It was a stage, and I needed to know if there was anything beyond it. I took the highway out of town, past the exit signs, past the last of the gas stations, past the places where the billboards no longer advertised anything real. The road ahead stretched too far, not long, not in a way that could be measured, but endless. The numbers on my odometer climbed, but the landscape barely changed. The sun sat frozen in the sky, locked in an orange haze that never deepened into night or brightened into day. The gas gauge didn't move. The mile markers stopped appearing. And then I saw the first sign. A massive overhead banner spanning the width of the highway. No logos, no sponsors, just one phrase, printed in letters too large to ignore. There is nothing for you outside. I gripped the wheel, knuckles white. My foot pressed harder on the gas. Another sign. Turn back. The next one was worse. You are not meant to leave. I pulled over. My hands were shaking. I took a breath, looked at my phone. No signal. The date still hadn't changed. The clock still read the same time it had when I left. 3:47 a.m. I checked the GPS. The map didn't load. No location, no route, no landmarks. Just blank space, as if the world outside the city no longer existed at all. I turned the car around, not to go back, just to see. The road behind me was different. It wasn't the same stretch of highway I had just driven. It had rearranged itself. There were more signs now, and they all said the same thing. You have always been here. I tried a different route. Back roads, side streets, anything that wasn't the highway. It didn't matter. Every road curved back into itself. Every turn led nowhere. Every attempt brought me back to the same point. A stretch of pavement where the lines had faded, where the world seemed to thin out at the edges, as if I was standing on the last piece of something unfinished. Beyond it, the air shimmered. Not like heat waves, not like fog, like a screen trying to refresh, like the world itself hadn't been rendered past this point. I tossed a rock forward, past the edge of the road. It never landed. I drove to the airport next. There were people there, moving through the motions of travel, checking bags, holding tickets, sitting in plastic chairs, waiting for something that was never coming. I stood at the gate, watching the monitors. The flights were listed, cities, destinations, times, but no one boarded. No announcements played. The screens never updated. I checked the runways. The planes were there, but they never moved. Not a single takeoff, not a single landing. Just parked, engines silent, waiting for something that had already stopped existing. I watched a woman at the counter argue with an attendant. She gestured toward her ticket, her voice urgent, her face tight with frustration. The attendant nodded, smiled, typed something into the computer. But they never stopped nodding. The motion kept repeating, as if the conversation had stalled in place, as if they had been caught in a loop with no exit. The woman's face never changed. Her lips kept forming the same words, over and over and over. I ran. Didn't know where I was going, just needed to move. Needed to escape the feeling of being trapped in a moment that wasn't meant to last this long. The streets blurred. The air felt too thin, stretched over something that no longer had depth. Then I saw the border checkpoint. Tall fences, security booths, a place where the country was supposed to end and something else was supposed to begin. I barely stopped the car before getting out. The guards stood in their booths, eyes fixed ahead, faces blank. I approached the nearest one, asked where the nearest international crossing was. No response. I asked again. His lips moved, forming a sentence I didn't hear. Then the air shifted. The border wasn't real. It was there. But not in the way a real thing should be. It was painted on, sketched into place, an illusion of something that had stopped serving a purpose. I took a step closer. The guard blinked, and then for the first time, he turned to look at me. The static came first. A low hum, vibrating through the ground, making my teeth ache. The booths flickered, the fences wavered, the road behind me blurred. The world reset itself. And then, all at once, everything was gone. The fences, the booths, the road itself. Just a wide, empty stretch of nothing, flat and endless, leading nowhere at all. The country had no borders anymore, because there was nothing left to border against. I don't know how long I stood there. The guard was still there, still looking at me. But something behind his eyes had changed, something aware. His mouth opened. The static spiked, deep enough to make the world pulse around me. Then he spoke. Not a warning, not a threat, just 2 words. Go back. I drove home, or at least I think I did. The city appeared ahead, just as it always had, as if I had never left. The skyline stretched too wide. The lights flickered in perfect rhythmic intervals. As I pulled onto my street, I realized the TV in my apartment was already on. I stepped inside. The screen glowed in the dark. And there on the broadcast, the face of the leader stared back. For the first time, he wasn't speaking, just watching. His lips didn't move, but the voice was still there, coming from somewhere else, coming from everywhere. And then, for the first time, the time on my phone changed. Not forward, back. I don't know how long I stood there, staring at the time on my phone. It had moved backward. The date had shifted. Not to yesterday, not to last week, years. The clock pulsed in my hand, each flicker a reminder that something had reset. Not broken, rewound. And outside my window, the broadcast still played. But the words weren't coming from the television anymore. They were in the walls. I don't remember deciding to go to the White House. One moment, I was in my apartment, staring at the glowing screen. The next, I was walking through streets that didn't feel like streets anymore. The city had gone silent, the air dense with something that vibrated under my skin. I passed a row of cars. Their engines still hummed, their radios still on. Every station played his voice, not a speech, not a rally, just talking. A steady, calm monologue with no one there to hear it. The people still moved through the motions of their lives, but something was missing from them now. Their eyes followed me, but their heads didn't turn. Their mouths moved, but no sound came out. Like they were waiting for something, like they were holding their breath. The gates of the White House were open. I had seen them before, towering, cold, a barrier meant to separate, but now they stood invitingly wide, as if someone had been expecting me. I stepped inside. No security, no guards, no staff moving about. Just emptiness. The lights inside burned too bright, sterile and perfect, with no real source. The furniture sat untouched, pristine, like a museum display that had never been used. The air carried a low hum, a frequency just beneath hearing. And somewhere beneath it all, his voice kept going. I walked through the halls, the rooms stretched too long, the ceilings too high, the corridors curving where they shouldn't. The shape of the building had changed, just like the city, just like the roads. The paintings on the walls weren't of past leaders anymore. They were all him, Each one identical, the same expression, the same ageless smile, the same watching eyes. A door creaked open ahead of me. The Oval Office. I stepped inside, and the chair at the desk was empty. The television in the room switched on by itself, static at first. Then the image snapped into focus. It was him, but not a recording, not a press event, not something from before. He was looking directly at me. He sat at a desk that wasn't the one in front of me. His hands folded, eyes steady, too steady. He blinked once. And then, he said my name. I staggered back. The voice wasn't coming from the screen. It was coming from everywhere, through the walls, through the ceiling, through the air itself. I turned toward the desk. The chair was still empty, but the microphone on the desk was on, broadcasting, the same way it had been, the entire time. I reached for the papers on the desk. My hands shook. The pages were blank. All of them. I flipped through them faster, searching for something, anything, but there were no words, no signatures, no evidence that laws had ever been written here. The pen sat unused, resting beside a stack of pristine white paper. I looked up at the screen again. He hadn't moved, but his lips were still speaking my name, over and over, like a recording stuck in a loop, like he had always been saying it. The television cut out. The walls shuddered, and then, all at once, the entire White House began to change. The structure trembled, shifting like something waking up. The floor beneath my feet tilted slightly, like the building had always been something waiting to be undone. I stumbled back into the hallway. The paintings had changed again, not just his face, my face. Hundreds of portraits stretching endlessly down the corridor, all of them staring back at me, all of them smiling. The air thickened. Something pressed down on me, invisible but immense, like gravity had turned against me. The hum grew louder, the walls vibrating as if the entire place was breathing. I turned a corner, and the doors ahead opened on their own. A crowd stood waiting. Dozens, hundreds. Their faces were familiar but wrong. People I had seen in the city, people from the broadcasts, people who had stopped talking, stopped thinking, stopped being real. They stood in perfect rows, hands folded, waiting. Then they spoke, not with their mouths, with his voice, all of them, at once, the same words, the same tone, as if they had become part of the same endless speech, as if he had been speaking through them all along. I ran, through halls that stretched too far, past rooms that no longer had doors. The light flickered, pulsing in time with the hum, and the faces in the paintings watched me go. I reached the entrance, stepped outside, and the city was different again. The streets were full now. More people than before, more faces, all of them standing still, all of them looking at me. I turned back toward the building. The White House was gone. In its place stood the statue, bigger now, smiling wider, its arms outstretched as if welcoming me home. And from deep inside its stone form, a voice rumbled, low and steady, familiar, saying only one thing: 4 more years. Tonight's story couldn't have happened without the help of the lovely supporters on screen. Your generosity keeps these stories alive, and I can't thank you enough. If you enjoyed this tale and want to hear more, be sure to like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you never miss a new upload. And if you want to support the channel and get access to exclusive content, behind-the-scenes updates, and even early story releases, consider joining my Patreon. Every bit helps keep the lights on and the stories coming. Until next time, stay safe, stay curious, and stay out of the woods.